All right, so we welcome you to another episode of Learning Stories. This is a show where we profile a diverse set of learners from the 21st century. In each episode of this show, we interview a guest who has a unique story to share about how they acquired a set of skills and knowledge in a creative and innovative manner. In the process, we hope to uncover a new definition of learning as conceptualized, narrated, and imagined by the guest in our show for that day. Today's guest, Arunita Praharaj, is a communication specialist based in Bahrain with experience in the fields of journalism, advertising, and PR. In addition to this, more informally, she refers to herself as a Kisago of South Asian stories. I may have said that wrong, Aru, so you can correct
No,
me in a
that's
bit.
perfect. That's perfect. Yeah.
So she refers to
Yeah.
herself as the Kisago of South Asian stories, which is what she's currently using her Instagram account and blog for. I will link these sites in the show notes, and there's a lot to unpack there in terms of uh, Arunita's background and the work she does. But I I'm so excited for this interview because I've been a fan of your work for a really long time now. And one
Mhm.
of the things that I noticed in your work is this sense of nostalgia, Arunita, in terms of the memories you have of the people you were close to growing up, your childhood in Bahrain, and wherever you've been all over the world now. So, just to get this show started, Arunita, what are your memories of the Arunita growing up um, in Bahrain, and what were your some of your early influences there?
It's funny you say that, Abhishek, because one of my strongest suits in life has always been my memory.
Mm,
And it's very strange, but I remember things very early on in life, in the sense like I can look back and see things very clearly, to a point where I remember what people were wearing, how they looked, what they said when they, and when they were saying that particular thing, what they looked like. So I think that is something I really depend on, my memory, even when I'm building stories or writing something. I try not to exaggerate as much as possible because people catch on to that. And so, in order to do that, I depend on my memory a lot. So, growing up in Bahrain, especially because I moved from India, much like yourself, and uh, a lot of my initial years was spent missing my grandparents because I was very close to both my sets of grandparents. And so when I moved here, I remember being very nostalgic, like you pointed out. I probably didn't know that I was nostalgic at that point because I was very young. But I was definitely like missing them, and I was homesick in a very strange way. But gradually I found my own, and then you tend to, like, you make friends, and then your parents make friends, and you discover these new people and new interests. So like all of that then changes, and then you stop missing the people. Of course they're there in some part of your mind, which now probably reflects in what I do and what I write about. But then it started changing, the narrative started changing, and I was obsessed with Vimto growing up, because, like, drinking Vimto in the Gulf is like the thing. So everything to do with Bahrain, like shawarmas, the falafels, like all of that. So it started changing, the narrative started changing, and it started to be about like going to the beach. So those are like primarily what my memories are all about. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I think it's about a lot of things, since my mind flickers a lot like a bulb. So it goes
that-
here and there.
no, that's great, Haru. I think that's one of the things that we try and think about in this show is that so many times our life does not have a straight single path, right? And even the way we go around doing things, they're often related to such unconnected things growing up. But you
Mm.
know, I was reading one of the recent series of posts that you put up on your Instagram account, which was Pehchan, and you built it off your mom's story, and how she moved to Bahrain as an immigrant. And that was
Mm.
something that really caught my eye, because often we think about our own stories, but then there were people that are also responsible for our stories, and those are our parents. So um, what was I mean I know auntie and uncle were always supportive, but growing up, do you feel like you were influenced by some of the habits your parents had in terms of reading, and were they always pushing you to try other things? And I know reading is one of your, you know I mean, you really enjoy reading, and I've been following your blog and some of your posts. So maybe tell us a little bit about how that love for books developed, and maybe the influence of your parents, early on growing up.
Uh, Funnily enough, neither of my parents read. It is not like it's not something that I got from my immediate family.
Mm,
My mom used to read a lot of Hindi books. That's where I got my passion for Hindi from, Hindi and Urdu especially. And I think she influenced me a lot in that sense, that I was very interested in reading about like the Indian authors such as Mahadevi Varma and all of those, like
mm,
aside from coursework. But when it comes to reading, I think my maternal grandfather had a huge role to play in that.
mm,
He loves reading, and I think I caught it from him. He had like huge, like a collection of books, and he would recommend books to me. And as I kept growing up, he would recommend age appropriate books and novels to read. And I think it just caught on, and I think, of course, apart from that, when we were in school, I used to have this teacher called Shirley ma'am. She was my English teacher, and she saw that I had like an affinity towards writing. But of course it wasn't, it's one of those skills that it develops over time, and you can tell when someone is trying too hard, but you know that there's something there, like there's a spark. So she noticed that spark, and she told me that something you must do in order to get better is to read, because the more you read, the better writer you'll become, because you'll see how people are using words and the use of words, like noticing that and how they are using phrases, what kind of examples they draw from, what kind of parallels they're drawing from life will really influence you, and you'll become a better writer in that process. I don't think I understood that at that point. I just read books because I liked reading books, and I wasn't a very serious reader even, because I used to finish reading books very fast. But then something happened when I went to university, and I had to read, especially during my master's, which was in political journalism. So all of my essays really required me to read, like external reading aside from your coursework and your PowerPoint presentations. So we used to go to the library and we'd sit and just open books and read. And that's when I started making notes alongside reading.
mhm,
And I made reading into a huge task, because I would make notes, and I would actually, if I read something and it stuck with me, I would just close the book and think about it for the whole day. And sometimes that would inspire like little, like short write ups on something completely unaligned. But that particular thing triggered me into, writing about something else. So that's when I really took it up, and like I read books seriously. I'm a very serious reader. I don't read in swathes.
mm,
I read very slowly, like for months I keep reading the same book. And it's really, I'm in that sense, I'm a poor reader, but when I read something, I know everything about that book, and I truly try to understand why that author has written it, and what they were thinking, and what I've drawn from this. And so for me, reading is like almost like meditation at this point. When I
mm,
read something, I give all my attention to it, and I never like ditch books. Even if I don't like them, I try my best to finish the book, because I know each author is trying to say something. And I don't think you'll ever meet a bad book in your
mm,
life, because every book will teach you something, and it'll leave you with something. So I think it was a lot of things, but definitely it started with my maternal grandfather, who really pushed me towards reading, and then it grew, into a very serious habit.
I mean, yeah, it's so important, right? I like a couple of things come out to me when you say those things, because having someone to guide you at that point, especially with the kinds of books you read, is so
Definitely.
important, because you bring a lot of yourself to the books you read. And when we're younger, we think we need to read, you know great literature, we need to read books from all over the world, but it's so important to understand the things that you are particularly interested in, and maybe build off those little interests. Like a funny story I have to share with you is, I had this teacher that realized I was really passionate about sports. I
Mhm.
was not much of a reader. I mean, and it's weird we say that, because we read in different ways, in different forms, and we
Definitely.
consume media as well, right? But
Mm.
she realized I was interested in sports, and she gave me a book about a sport I was interested in. And for some reason, I felt for the first time this was a world I could be part of, and this was a world
Mm.
that accepted me
Mm.
with my quirks and my interests. And I just kept reading books about sports, and then I moved on to a related theme. So I was really able to relate to what you said, and that's how reading became a habit, right? You can read about things that
Mm.
you are interested in and then move on to other things. But coming
Definitely.
back to your story, Aru, I read an article on your blog that said, "Do what you want, but keep everyone happy." And just to backtrack a little, um, as children that grow up, in an NRI, like a non-resident Indian culture, or South Asian, sometimes there's an assumption that everything's really comfortable and everything's in place, and
Mhm.
you've got everything figured out. But most of our parents are professionals. They have a lot of aspirations and dreams for us, and it often transfers onto our subculture growing up in school. Like you have to do like certain professions are placed on a pedestal, and it's very confusing for a young person, because you feel like the ideal objective is to possibly finish those parameters, get into a good school, get into a good university, and then make independent, well thought through decisions. And I know that I'm just curious about that journey for you. Like, what did you study in high school, and what did you decide to study in university, and then how did that shift and evolve over time? And were there any influences that led to that decision, or do you feel like it came more from you? And I'm just curious about that journey for you.
I'll be completely honest here because I'm glad you brought this up. This is a huge struggle for South Asian kids in general. No matter where they are around the world, academics are usually like 90% of the time the most important thing, according to their parents. Like initially, like everyone else, I was very influenced by my parents and what my parents had to say about my career. I studied commerce in school. I didn't want to do it, honestly. Like, I think it would have been a better, fit for arts. But I chose to study commerce because I was told that had much better quote unquote scope. And I enjoyed it. I was good at it, but it wasn't something that I wanted to pursue further. But as pressures would have it, I studied accounting and finance. My father is a chartered accountant, and he thought it would make for a good profession for me because I was doing well in commerce. So I went to the UK and I studied accounting and finance. And I'll be completely honest, while my grades were fine, I was absolutely miserable because the concept of people studying something because their parents told them became very foreign in the UK. Everyone around me was doing it because they were really passionate about it. So when we'd have seminars or we talk about what we're doing and what we're studying, I would feel really left out because people were genuinely thinking of this as a career. They were very serious about this. And then there I was in the corner, like just doing it because, I mean, that's what my dad said. And I thought this would be great. So towards the end of my degree, I think in the middle, I also, in my third year, I went and I had two sets of internships. So one was in a journalistic field in Bahrain, and the other was with PwC. So when I was working, I mean, even when I finished those internships, although internships are probably like 2% of what you're going to experience in the real, sort of professional world, I just knew that this is not the career for me. I can't be someone who sits at a 9 to 5 job, even if auditing involves going to different offices. I just can't do this. This number crunching is exhausting.
Mhm.
Um, and I sort of knew, even though I didn't tell anybody at that point, because I knew that would cause a lot of panic, obviously, because my parents had invested a good amount of money and effort into me studying accounting and finance. So I just knew it in my heart that this is not what I would continue with. So when I finished my degree, I'd already started applying to journalism programs for masters. And I broke it to my parents. And I have to be honest, it was not taken very well because it was a shock and nobody understood why I was doing what I was doing. I did try to explain how miserable I was, but it wasn't like, they didn't get it because, and that's something about our culture as well. We want our kids to have good jobs. We don't think about it as a career, as something they live and breathe.
Mhm.
So oftentimes, not just my parents, but like my immediate circle of friends told me that, well, it's just something you do during the day. Like, it doesn't matter. This is going to pay you well. Why are you can write on the side. And that is definitely not something that was calling out to me. And I knew I would probably be paid really well. I would probably be settled in a really nice place, but I would be utterly miserable. I just knew it. I knew it in my gut. And despite everything, I just waited for my results to come in from the journalism schools. And I made it to the top, like the number one university for journalism at that point, which was University of Sheffield. When that came through, there was like some bit of confidence, and like my parents eased into it. And then I
Mhm.
started studying journalism. I, like, worked in the UK as well for a bit. And I knew that this was my calling. Like, I don't regret it one bit. So whilst like I was influenced by my parents and everybody around me at first, eventually I chose what I wanted to do because I knew I had to be happy doing, whatever I was doing. So yeah.
And I mean, there's because I that decision of moving between professions so early in your life, Arnita, I think that's not a very easy decision to make, especially when you think about. Um, I mean, as someone that's very young and that's ambitious and that has, we often tend to look at the people immediately next to us, and we don't want to do it, but we make comparisons, and
Mhm.
I think the indicator we look at is how big or how comfortable or how much money they're making, rather than if it's aligned to who they truly are, right?
Mhm.
And you can be successful in so many different ways, right? You don't have to be successful, and that is something that I see coming through in your journey, right? This ability to constantly experiment and be okay with taking experiments or like taking a particular path, but then if it doesn't seem to work out, making that shift. But I feel like in your journey, Arnita, I know you were at Newcastle for your first
Mhm.
degree, which is in North England, and then Sheffield is closer to Manchester, which is a little
Mhm.
further down south. But
Mhm.
what was it like? Because you grew up in Bahrain, which is primarily Middle Eastern, and then your roots are in Orissa in India, which is in the
Mhm.
eastern part of India. But you probably have friends and family from all over, and then you go and you're uprooted into a completely different culture. in England, which also has its various sub communities. I know the North is very different from the South and the East and the West. So, I mean, what was it like being a third culture, uh, kid or student in these cultures? I mean, in these different environments, and do you feel like that was constantly playing on your mind as you went about thinking about, doing all these different things?
Yes, of course, definitely. Because I think when I grew up here, it wasn't that difficult, as you would know, because we're still closer. Whilst it's a completely different culture, it's also very people are very, very accommodating. So you never feel like you're far away from your own country. Also, the large number of Indians, and again the tolerance and the humility in general. But then when you move to, say, somewhere like England, it's far off, and there's a huge culture shock to sort of deal with when you
Mhm.
first move. For instance, like it's simple things such as, like, drinking is a very normal thing in those cultures, whereas both Bahraini and Indian cultures don't exactly like embrace drinking in the way that the English do. So initially, like, firstly, when you go in, it's not just you who are like trying to settle in a different environment. It's also the other people trying to understand you, and figure you out as well, because they have their own sort of settling to do. So I remember being a very judgmental 17-year-old, because I went with certain preconceived notions about the world. And, like, you believe in certain things, and like when you see people doing something differently, you tend to judge them. So, like, over time, though, it changed, the judgment changed, and I'm very happy for that, because I'm a much better person now. But I think the biggest struggle was initially, and this is funny, but the accent.
Mm.
Oftentimes, like, I would be afraid to speak, because I didn't want to pronounce something the wrong way, or I didn't want to be made fun of, or whatever it was, because um, a lot of my very close friends who were settled in the UK, or who were like British Indians, basically, they too, like, didn't realize what they were doing when they were making fun of some of us. And there were a bunch of us who went from India or from Bahrain and had our own set of accents, and they would make these fleeting jokes, which they didn't mean to offend us. Deep down it was just a joke, but it had such a huge impact. And uh, and you probably know, like, I had like a background in public speaking. That is what I did all throughout my high school years. And I enjoyed it. It was something I was good at. But then when I moved, all of a sudden, I was scared to speak. I was really, really scared to put out my opinion, simply because I didn't know if people would accept the way I talked, or what I was pronouncing was correct or incorrect, or these little things that sort of get to you. And I think a funny instance is that apparently, like, nobody taught us how to pronounce the vowels correctly. I don't know if you had the same experience, but apparently we don't know how the difference between a v and a w, as in a v and a w. So that was something that constantly happened to me, and people would correct me all the time. And when you get corrected, it's okay. Like, I was open to learning, but you're some deep down, you sort of die a little bit every time you're corrected. So the accent was a huge, huge problem. And in when I look back, and I was and during my first or second year, I was very adamant. I'm like, I'm not going to change my accent. I can change my pronunciation,
Mhm.
but I won't be changing my accent for this. I'm sorry, it's unnecessary. People have understood me perfectly well in the past, so I'm not going to be changing how I talk.
Yeah.
But then my career happened, which was in journalism, and a lot of it was hardcore journalism, when you call up people and you ask for stories. Um, Majority of the times, people would just cut the call on me. It was a newsroom wherein people would call to give a story, to talk about something, and when they would transfer the line to me, and I would start talking, they would cut the call.
Wow.
So that's when I was truly hit by it in
Mm.
my third slash fourth year in the United Kingdom. I realized that I might have to learn the accent. And I was told that in order to make them more comfortable and for them to give you their story, you need to have a little bit of an accent
Sure.
so they feel comfortable. And so
Mm.
I actually took up elocution classes of sorts, which most of my closest friends don't know about.
Mm.
But I acquired the British accent. I
Mm.
actually learned it, how to pronounce things the British way. And that, like, it was a huge hit to my pehchan or an identity, because why do I need to have an accent for
Yeah.
people to understand me? But that's just the reality of things, and believe it or not, it made things easier in the newsroom. So I think accent and like just putting myself out there was one of the biggest struggles. Like, and I didn't, and I think it came as a shock because I didn't think that would be one of my struggles.
Wow.
I was overconfident in the way I carried myself or spoke. So it was a blow.
Wow.
But you live and learn, and everything is an experience, I guess.
Yeah, and I completely relate to that because I'm currently in Canada, and I went to school to be an English teacher, and very often I catch myself saying certain things, and it's not said in a particular way here, and and then I realized that there is an unconscious hierarchy in terms of North American and British English being placed on a pedestal. And that goes back to our colonial legacy in terms of
Definitely.
how the global system is structured, right? But then if you think about it, a lot of us grew up speaking English as one of our main languages, right? And we just spoke it in a different way, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it is in any way different from. But then I understand where you're coming from when you say that as people that live in different cultures, we constantly have to code switch, right, between
Definitely.
one identity
Yes.
and another identity, and it comes back to that point about each of us carrying multitudes within us, right? We're not only South Asian, but we're also an immigrant. We also have a particular gender, and this gender will be very different from our sexual orientation. And then we choose a particular profession. And when I was thinking about the series that you started, I was looking at some of the recent posts, and it was fascinating to see how people would talk about different aspects of their identity in the Instagram series. And I'm going to link all of this in the notes, and I highly recommend you go see this series. It's Pechan, and I'm going to put that down. But sorry, whenever you tell me something, I'm always going off on a tangent, Aru. But I know you were very interested in extracurricular activities growing up. And again, I'm trying to, like, one of the things we try and do with this show, Aru, is to create a visual archive of the individual at a particular point in their lives, and then you come back and look at this and see this is this was me in some way at some point of time. Obviously we can't be accurate, but in school, I remember you as someone, and we were not in the same school, but we were, we had common friends.
Mm,
But I know
mm.
you were the head girl at NMS, and then at Newcastle, you were involved in a lot of cultural activities, and it was probably the same at Sheffield. I'm curious if you were able to continue doing that at university, and what was the influence of some of those things. Also, um, as an international student in that context, what are some of the other things that you would do in those cities like Newcastle and Sheffield? Because I know they're pretty happening, and I mean, I'm curious about your life as an international student there too.
So I think I was very culturally, like, I think culture was a huge factor. Like, from my childhood, I was very attracted to it. It's funny how you sort of cling to your roots even more when you live outside
Mm.
of the country of origin. So culture I was always like clinging to. That's something I did in school, and then when I moved on to university, I thought I would put an end to it and I would focus on my career. But then as things would happen, I just gradually, there were societies. There was the Hindu and Sikh society. There were the Seesaw. There was the Seesaw, and like there was so much going on. And obviously, like I wanted to be a part of it, and I did go ahead and I did that. So we used to organize a lot of spiritual, religious, and even like fun desi events. That was something I really enjoyed as an international student, and I think that sort of keeps you grounded and keeps you sane when you have so much going on and there are so many things changing around you. You know that you still have a bunch of desi friends that you can talk to or like go back to when things are falling apart. So apart from that, to be honest, I was a very boring international student. So I don't think I can give much inspo to anybody out there. But something I really enjoyed doing, and I found my love for it there was. I definitely like found out that I really like tea. And because England is famous for tea, my friends and I would like discover a new tea house or a new tea parlor every other week. And although we were on a stringent budget, we'd somehow make up for that. And we'd be like, we're going to check this out. We're going to check that out. By the end of it, I could tell the different teas by just like smelling them.
Wow.
And I'm very proud of that. That's something I acquired in England. So I think what really happened, like why I recommend that you travel somewhere and like go live somewhere for a year if you can, is because you mingle with that culture and you realize that your views of the world are so, they're this tiny drop in the ocean. There's so much to explore. I think just that aspect of it. So for instance, I was part of this group called Isaac, and which exists all over the world, and that in itself was like an eye opener, because you mingle with so many people with different cultures. And I used to do this thing which now people make memes about, which is like, where are you from? I would ask people all the time. And when they would tell me, I'm from Malaysia, but they looked, Indian to me. So I'd be like, yeah, but where are you originally from?
Mhm.
Because I realized why I was doing that and why I thought it was fine is because living in Bahrain, we still call ourselves Indian. And that's a lot to do with the citizenship and
Yep.
yada, yada, yada. But that's not the case for like so many others who live in other countries. So I think just that awareness in general, just by being in a new place, when you acquire that and you don't even know when you're acquiring it, it's not,
Mhm.
I can't really call it by one name. But as an international student, that is your greatest gift, like the
Mhm.
unlearning and like and like rediscovering yourself by just interacting by different people. And you can do that by like, there are different means you can do that. Some choose to do it by like joining reading clubs and drinking tea. Unfortunately, I fall within that category. And then the others do it by like drinking and partying and whatever it is. Everything is an exchange.
Yeah.
So whatever floats your boat, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it's so funny you mentioned tea, and I was just gonna take a sip of my tea, and I was like, that is perfect timing, and that's so true, because growing up, like one of my fond memories growing up is that, like, even though the both of us are from India, right? I'm from Karnataka, which is a state in the southern part. And
Mm.
am I right when I say you're from Orissa? Or are you from
Yes,
Orissa? Okay.
I'm from
And
Marissa.
and
Yes,
is it still Orissa, or is it changed to another name now?
it's Orissa, but yeah,
Okay.
I think the spelling has changed, but it's still Orissa. Yeah,
Go- Got it.
yeah.
Got it. And
Mm.
sometimes, like one of, I mean, I when I was in India, I really enjoyed going around. But being Indian, sometimes I'd go to another state and find myself being in a culture that's very different. And it was such
Mm.
an odd experience because I was Indian. I'm supposed to feel at home
Mhm.
here, and my parents grew up, I mean, in Bombay, which is again a
Mm.
completely different culture. And I was having this conversation with my dad the other day, and I'm like, and you probably have something similar. My dad could speak like 6 or 7 different languages, like Marathi, Hindi, and then Urdu is related, or Telugu, Tamil. So our in a lot of ways, I was coming to terms with this idea of being Indian and in a foreign context like Bahrain or in the UK. I think we really hold on to our culture a lot more, whether
Mm,
it's Bollywood or cricket or, these
mm,
things become so much more important. But I remember all the cultural events that we
mm,
were all so excited about, like Dandiya or some of the other stuff or like the Onam feast. So it's just fascinating to see how we hold on to our culture a lot more in these foreign contexts.
absolutely.
and
Mm,
and yeah, and just bringing it back to your experience in the newsroom after your degree. And I know that this was one of the most prestigious like journalism training programs in the UK. And I'm curious, what was it like to uh, be in that newsroom? But even before you were in that newsroom, Arnita, you took up a lot of internships. And I think
mm.
this is something that is underestimated in terms of it being a good learning opportunity when you are trying to figure out your paths, right? So, when you were doing your accounting degree, what made you take up the the journalism internship in Bahrain, and what did that teach you? And then how did you feed that curiosity to eventually lead to that particular degree? And maybe like I know my questions go into like these large open
No,
abstract
no,
ideas,
no.
but what I
I
really
get
want to
that.
know is
Mm.
um, how did your curiosity for journalism develop, and how did these professional experiences feed it?
So I think I was always into writing growing up. And at first, I wanted to go into civil services because I thought that was a good fit for my skill set. But then I realized that that is probably not something I want to do at that point of time. For some reason, I can't remember exactly why I thought that wasn't the fit for me at that point of time. Um, but I knew writing, like it was always, even when I was studying accounting, I constantly wrote. I used to write just for myself. It wasn't getting published anywhere, but everything was a little story. And like I used to cook stories in my head and write. And I knew I wanted something that would sort of involve me in this beautiful thing of writing. So when you think of writing, you think of journalism. It's sort of an obvious sort of career path. Although now I know that's not the only thing, which we may cover later on. But so I just knew that I had to do journalism. And then when I was studying accounting, why I took up that journalism internship was simply to understand, is this really what I want to do? Or am I just lost and still discovering what I like and what I don't like? Or should I stick to accounting?
Mhm.
But the fact that I did both one after the other, not simultaneously, it was an eye opener, and I highly recommend this. If you are between two career paths, you must intern in both of them.
Mhm.
And whilst internships are really not the truest reflection of what's to come, they still give you a great foundation to judge from, because sometimes you just don't like being in one space from 9 to 5. That's
Mhm.
it. Yeah, you're not one of those people. You can't sit in one space.
Yep.
And if you can't do that, you can't be an accountant,
Yep.
unfortunately. You just can't. It is one of those desk jobs.
Yep.
Not to put down accountants in any way. Their job is equally important. And I actually really admire accountants, which is why I studied it. Um, but I knew that that was not the job for me. I needed, and another thing, I knew that I could not work in a serious environment,
Mhm.
as serious as I seem. And I, like people often tell me that they find me intimidating, but I can't. I knew that I needed a free space where people
Mhm.
would sort of, throw ideas, discuss. Everything was a brainstorming session. People were more open, not too corporate. It had to be a little loose. So these simple things sort of help you realize what you like and what will truly make you happy. And I know some people might be like, that doesn't matter, it's just a job. But if you are looking to build a career, these things matter.
True.
They really do.
Yeah.
So that internship just, like it just made me establish the fact that this was not the job for me. Like it was actually the turning point in my career, and that's a good decision I made by doing both, because then I understood that this was not the career for me.
Wow.
And then gradually moving on, I also wrote in Sheffield. I studied journalism, so I made it all about writing.
Yeah.
And but before that, in Newcastle as well, wherever I was a part of these societies or whatever, I always took up the jobs, the writing jobs. So
Mm.
whether it was a social media post or a press release, I would be happy to do it. And that sort of told me that this makes me happy. Like after I finish this, I'm happy. It comes easily to me,
Yeah.
which sort of like it was guiding me. All the little things you do are like guiding you to that like purpose, in life. And then Sheffield, I joined the Sheffield Press, and which was a part of the university. So
Mm.
we used to go and review movies. We used to do a lot of fun stuff. And I think that just set me off. And it sort of, again, like I discovered my niche.
True.
Gradually, I realized that I like political journalism because that is what I was studying.
Yeah.
I really enjoy politics, world politics in general. But what I truly love is human stories.
Mm.
So even when I would write a very political piece, it would be from the perspective of this one person that I've seen, because it had to be in my head, it just had to be engaging. And how do you do that? If you talk about a person,
Yeah.
it becomes much more engaging than, just talking about one like set of political agendas or political leaders for that matter.
Yeah.
So I think those little activities, those internships, even joining societies or doing relevant extracurriculars will always help you. You might not realize it, but everything is sort of a teaching moment. Even if you're not truly like getting that vibe at that moment, but when you look back, you'll
Yeah.
realize that everything sort of led to who you are today and what you're doing. So
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah, and I remember you telling me, we were just chatting before this, and you told me about an article you wrote that was
Mm.
related to AIDS awareness. Was it AIDS?
It was diabetes.
Diabetes
Yeah.
awareness. I'm so
Yes.
sorry. And I feel like, was
Mm.
that like sort of a moment, like a juncture that made you realize politics and journalism can come together in this unique way to actually create impact?
De- Definitely. Looking back, that was one of my favorite articles that I did, because it helped raise funds. It had a purpose, and it was these siblings who had lost their father, unfortunately, to diabetes. And oftentimes, we don't realize how big of an issue diabetes really is. It's fatal. It can kill you, and we take it very lightly because we make jokes about it and memes about it. You don't see memes about like AIDS. You would never see memes about AIDS because people take it seriously. People don't take diabetes seriously, but a lot of people actually die from just being diabetic and not taking care of themselves and not realizing where their health is at. So that article too was written from the perspective of those siblings. It spoke about how their dad was such a wonderful person, and they didn't even know what was going on with him because he never told anybody all the issues that he was going through. Eventually, when they found out that he was going through this condition wherein it had worsened to a point that it was fatal. So I think it was a very engaging story. It also got a lot of hits on our website, and people read it and reread it and shared it. So it helped the cause. And that's also like, that was my like sort of like the universe telling me that this is what you should do. Um, Even when you talk about a cause or whatever it is that you're taking up, it must have a human angle, and it must be a story, even
Yeah.
if it's a journalistic piece of writing. And I used to get told off a lot in my journalism program, which was like my accreditation program called the NCTJ, which is where you get accredited in England and Wales to become a journalist. And I would get told off a lot for my creative writing. So they'd be like, why are you acting as if you're on a creative writing program? But and at that point, it used to hurt me.
Mhm.
But I realized very quickly in like 2 to 3 months that I'm like, yes, I am a creative writer.
Mhm.
I cannot write dry pieces.
Mhm.
I cannot depend on facts. And there are some authors or writers who do that beautifully. They present facts and simply facts, and you would still read it because it has such a great flow. But for me, it has to have a human angle. It needs to
Sure.
tell a story. So it was, like, not only did I find out that I liked journalism and I like writing, I also found my niche in it.
Got it.
So really, like, every day you're sort of discovering yourself. And I think the biggest takeaway from that is to just say yes more, to
Mhm.
do the things that you think will add to your career. You must say yes to them,
Right.
because even if you don't think you'll be good at them, you'll know like little details about yourself which will help you discover the bigger picture.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's, I mean, you put it so beautifully, how and one of the things I'm working on here is just like a part-time summer job. We are looking at the civil war in El Salvador, which went on for 12 years from 1980 to 1992, and we're trying to look at how the Globe and Mail and the New York Times covered the war. And I realized that these news media outlets were possibly the only way for people to record what happened in that particular political situation. And that's when I realized how important journalism actually is, to keep a record that is that presents all perspectives. But I also understand the struggle of, because when because I studied literature, one of the things I took, like one of my minors was related to journalism. And I know they tell you to focus on the objective five W's and make sure all of that comes out in the first paragraph. And then, but for me, the stories that always stand out are the ones that talk about how it affects a particular individual in this context, because that individual's experience becomes sort of a synecdoche, to what the larger situation is. That smaller individual experience tells us a little bit about what the macro
Bigger
situation
picture,
is.
exactly.
and
Yeah.
and that's where I feel human stories are so important, right? By telling a human story, you can let the reader make those inferences about what the larger context is, right? And this is where I want to segue into this another transition you made. It's amazing how you have so many powerful, beautiful transitions, Aru. But you started working as a brand manager at Unisono, and you also started actively writing on your Instagram account and your blog. And what I slowly am coming to is this passion for telling stories, no matter the medium. And whether it's social media or a more professional setting, maybe just tell us a little bit about some of the projects you took up in the last 2 or 3 years. Like, you can tell us about Shamsaha. Am I saying that right? So
Mhm.
that was one of the professional projects that you got to work on, where you saw that alignment happening. But also
Mhm.
about your amazing, amazing Instagram account. I mean, I just love how you bring so much of yourself to it, but also, and honestly, when I read your posts, Saru, and just the series, I mean, it's so beautiful how you combine words and pictures. That is something I feel is a real skill. You tell a story about a photo, but you are often the person in that photo creating that scene. So maybe you could talk to us about Pehchan or Chitti Aayi Hai and Shamsaha. And I'm just really excited about this part going.
Yeah, I think I'm really excited about this part as well, but I'd like to briefly talk about the transition first as to
Sure,
why I moved, because it just to, give some context.
sure.
So when I moved back here, I was working as a journalist, and I won't name the publication, but and I didn't exactly enjoy it because I think it's a very different environment. It's obviously media is more censored, and we use media for different things here. So I realized it was more PR led, and oftentimes, that whole passion for human stories and telling a person's story, there wasn't much room for that. And I'm not saying there isn't any room and nobody is a journalist. Of course, there are very well established journalists here, some of whom I really look up to. But I felt like when they started out, things were different, and it would have been very difficult for me to carry on and continuously feel a little bit let down, because then I would lose my passion and I would be writing a lot of PR pieces. So that made me decide that, I'm going to make this switch, and from here on I'm going to write for myself. And by this time I had networks, and this is something beautiful that happens when you transition. You make different networks of friends and professional connections. So I knew that if I really wanted a piece to be out there, or if it was worth it, I would find the medium for it, or someone would approach me for the right piece. And that's how I moved into brand strategy and brand management. And while it sounds like a completely different sort of career path, it shares the same skill sets. It involves a lot of storytelling, and it involves the personification of brands, and it's a very interesting field. Of course, it was new to me as well. I learned things from scratch, but I used the same skill sets. And um, the only thing was that my stories didn't have my names under them anymore, and that was done on the side, on a freelance basis. So during this brand management and brand strategist period of my life, I think it's my favorite, personal favorite projects that I worked on was Shamsaha. They were formerly known as the Women's Crisis Care International, which is the Middle East's first women's crisis helpline. And it's a 24-hour service. So anyone who's suffering from domestic abuse, mental abuse, any sort of abuse, um, and just not just abuse, just anxiety and depression in general, can call up the helpline and speak to the people, and someone will always be available to talk to you about it. So when they came to us, their name was Women's Crisis Care International, and the issue they were facing was they wanted to make it more region specific. They wanted it to reflect the Middle East more, whilst keeping in mind that it is something that's dedicated to women. So we worked on an extensive process of rebranding, which is a very beautiful exercise wherein you sit in about 2 workshops, which is a minimum, and you discover where the brand is at. So you talk about what are their current objectives and where do they think they are, what do they like about the current brand, what do they not like about it. So these are a few things that you look into, and then based on where they want to be, you then create a strategy, you create a personality for them, and this includes things like things as silly as if they were an animal, they would be this, and if they were if they were a person, their favorite color would be this. So you really personify that brand, you make it into a living and breathing human, which then determines what it looks and feels like.
Wow,
So
fascinating.
it's a very fascinating, if I may say so myself, it's a very fascinating experience. Um, so when we came out of it, on the other side, there's also a naming workshop which happens separately. Once the person has been created, you then decide what you would name them. And we knew that it had to be a local name. It had to be something positive without too many, Arabic is a very beautiful but a very difficult language. So it shouldn't have any of the, alphabets or syllables that need the epiglottis. So it must be something that everyone can pronounce and it would be correct. So we came up with Shamsaha, which means her sun, as in the sun and the moon, and which was all about like positivity and her strength. The sun is often like associated with strength, new beginnings, and hope.
Mm.
Um, so that's where we sort of went with it, and the platform is doing very well. In fact, they had much better engagement with it because it wasn't a foreign entity anymore. It was something people understood. It fit within the local dynamics, and it was pink mainly. It was a very bright poppy pink, which was bold. Not the usual pastels that we associate femininity with.
Mhm.
So it was a very beautiful project that we worked on, and it was incredible. We then went on to work on a campaign for them called "It's Not Okay,"
Okay.
which was about physical abuse and domestic violence. So we went through a series of facts around the world, and just in general about women and how they are discriminated. So we learned many different things. For instance, cars, their safety setups are designed for men, because
Mm.
when they use a dummy, they only keep a man's body in mind. So
Oh.
women are more prone to accidents and deaths due to accidents. So we found out all these facts, and the campaign was all about women putting their hand out, and it said it's not okay, to trying to put a stop to the whole thing, and it was a very well recognized campaign. People all over Bahrain took it up.
Wow.
People participated in it, and there was a lot of user engagement. So I think um, it was something very beautiful that I was a part of. I still look back on it fondly because it had a cause, it had a why, and I think that's something I am very drawn towards. So yeah, that's Shamsaha.
That's beautiful, and I think one of the parts that I really enjoy about these conversations is there comes a particular point in your life when there's a real alignment between something you can give the world and your background and skill set, and it's beautiful to for you. I mean, I think this particular project and the article you wrote about raising awareness about diabetes. I mean, there was a point when there was a complete alignment between, your deepest, larger focus professionally and personally, and how you can really add value to the world, right? And I don't think it's very easy to get to that point early on in your career. I mean, you were able to look at different opportunities, but I think it's kudos to your ability to understand that your core sort of larger vision is to tell powerful stories, but you were able to do it in different mediums, and try it out in different mediums, and have spaces to explore it in different ways. And I want to be respectful of time, Aru, and I know we're just about a couple of minutes over, so can we just go on for about 5 to 10 minutes more, Aru? Would that be okay?
Perfect. Perfect. Yeah, that's
Awesome.
fine.
Yeah, because I know it's a weekday and I don't want to take too much of your
No, don't
time.
worry about it. Don't worry about it. Yeah.
Perfect. So, and this is when I want to talk about your the Instagram account and also your blog, Ari. And I was looking through. I literally looked through all the stories, and before Shitty Ai Hai, there was Mirabai, and there was also conversations with you in terms of the books you were reading, and all the beautiful, beautiful saris. Ari, they're all so wonderful. I feel like you can start a fashion blog of your own. I think it's just so much of you, and at least whatever I've known of you over time. But maybe, tell us how you conceptualize this idea in your, because there are so many elements. There is the setting, creating those visuals is not easy, because I think there's so much thought into that. But then the story, and then making sure it goes off in a series. But then also I wrote like a little post for
Mhm.
Pechan related to my mother's identity, as an immigrant in Bahrain. So, like, how do you conceptualize these stories, and maybe tell us about one or two of these stories that you really enjoyed working on your Instagram account?
So I think Instagram wasn't something I did with an intention, to push myself out there or anything. It just happened. One day I started to create these characters, and it was to do with saris. And after I'd come back, I I had the time and the leisure to like the access to my mom's saris. So, and I started draping them. And one day I was looking at my photos, and I felt like that in that particular image, I looked like someone else, or I felt like someone else. And so I wrote about that particular person. And then I said, I'll probably put this up and I'll see what happens. So when I put that character out there, and I called her Nandini because she looked very, someone who was very like caught in her culture. And, but she also had dreams which were like hidden and all of that. So when I did that, it had a good response. And I continued it with two, three other characters. And gradually I sort of felt like, this could be a thing. I could tell a story and I could merge my interests. Something that I think has really helped me is merging, really realizing where my skills and my strengths are. You must always do that. Even if you're not making a SWOT analysis diagram, you must always be aware of your strengths
Mhm.
and your weaknesses. So I knew that I loved saris. I knew that I loved writing, and I knew that I wanted to tell stories. Mm, and that sort of led to this whole Instagram. I discovered Instagram, and gradually I saw, with the recommendation of a few friends, I turned it into a public account, and I opened it out to the public. So initially, I was, for the first year or so, I was just creating content on my own, and I was everything. I was the photographer, I was the writer, and I was also the person setting up the whole place, the stylist, and everything involved. But as I just put myself out there, and I sort of, in fact, I think in my second year or into Instagramming and blogging, and I, at this point, I was also talking about South Asian, like especially brown girl problems that all brown girls like face. So I think in my second year, sometime in the beginning, I started realizing that I wanted to tell better stories. I wanted better visual aid. So, and I just put it out there. I didn't really speak to anyone, or try to get someone to collaborate with me.
Mhm.
Whilst I was out there, people started to, message me, and they asked me if I would collaborate with them, and if I could give them the ideas, they would help me bring them to life through photographs or videos. And that's potentially how Mira was born. And I was always very scared. I have to say that I didn't take up many of the offers by many great photographers. Like they actually asked me to collaborate with them, and I was always too scared, and
Mhm.
I was just in my shell. And I said, no, I'm not very comfortable. I don't know how I look. I'm okay with phone photography, but I don't know what I look like under like professional lens. And I just put down a lot of those opportunities. But one fine day, my friend Ruby, she came up to me, and she asked me if I would do Mira with her. Mira was actually her concept. She told me, you'd fit this perfectly, and we did Mira. It hit off really well with the audience.
Mhm.
And that's where I sort of, I really have to thank her, because that's where I developed that mojo, and I was like, okay, I can work with other people, I can collaborate. um to talk of projects, my favorite one so far has to be Pehchan. And I love that you've contributed as well. You connected to it, even though you're not a homemaker, and you're not a woman. You don't fit that character, but you connected to it because you immediately drew that parallel to your mom. And that's sort of why I did that, because I know that a lot of our mothers came here without much of an identity for themselves, and they probably didn't even get that many opportunities even now to discover themselves, or really like conventionally set aside a pehchan for them. They sort of like we became parasites of their identities, and
Yeah.
they were absolutely happy with that. And whilst I'm in no way promoting that, this generation and age, but we do have to acknowledge that there are these sets of moms who've
Yep.
done this for us.
Yep.
And that was my dedication to like to those uprooted mothers who left everything that they knew and came to these foreign lands and tried to build a life for us. And of
Yep.
course, our fathers had a huge role to play, But our moms were the ones who stayed back and were dealing with so many emotions, which, no one probably ever understood or applauded them for.
Yeah.
Um, the beauty of that series, though, was that whilst it was about uprooted mothers, of course, immigrant mothers related to it, immigrants related to it, like, for instance, yourself, what I really loved was a lot of people in different stages of their life doing different things related to it.
Mm.
So in the sense, like, there were girls who were like working, who'd moved a different city within the same country. There were people who had rediscovered certain skills after a certain point in their life. It wasn't even immigration, it was just rediscovering themselves. People who left abusive marriages and restarted a whole new journey for themselves. That just made it very special because, like you said, the whole aspect of an identity is so unique because you firstly, it's not just one person carving an identity. There are like so many factors, that lead to the creation of one.
Yeah.
And it's funny that although only some conventional identities get celebrated. For instance, if you're a movie star, or if you work at a branded firm, or or if you're rich or whatever, certain labels or those kind of identities get celebrated, but actually everyone's journey is extraordinary in their own ways,
True.
and everyone's struggles are extraordinary in their own ways. So that is where the idea truly came from, and I'm really happy to see how it's taking form. So yeah, it's definitely one of my favorite Instagram projects.
And thank you for your work on that. I'm so excited about the projects you're going to come up with in the future too, because I feel it gives people a space to talk about things that are really important to all of us. And this is probably something I would not, just like a funny story. I mean, like a important, not so funny story. But I shared that little note with my mother, and it was the first time I was able to have that sort of conversation with her, because we weren't as open about some of those things, and she wouldn't talk openly about it. And it was just beautiful that even though we've never, like, had that conversation through social media, you were able to help me spark a conversation that was really important to me. And and sometimes we forget that we need to tell the people we love them, and their journey is so important to us. So thank you for that, Aru. And I think that's like a great, like a really positive note to, like, probably end this. But as an ending note, I know you read a lot. You probably watch a lot of movies, and you're also working on a lot of interesting brand campaigns. Oops. Um, yeah, sometimes. Okay, there's a slight disturbance here. We're just gonna wait for a couple of seconds. Hey,
Hey, I'm really sorry. I'm not sure what happened there.
that's okay. That's completely fine. It's probably could be my internet too. It's been a little sketchy. But what I was thinking about, Aru, is that I know you read a lot. You probably watch a lot of movies that you enjoy, and you're also working in the brand industry. So maybe, could you tell us, like, one recommendation for a book that you really enjoyed, a film that you really enjoyed, and why? And maybe a brand campaign that you felt really brought out a human story according to you. And it could be from any context, not even India. So even the books and the movies. And this is personally like my sort of thing because I'm really intrigued by the things you read and watch. So I'd love to know your answers to this.
So books, I'm going to be very, at the expense of sounding repetitive. I think everybody must read A Suitable Boy. And whilst it sounds like a book that's about specific things, especially if you're Indian and you're interested in, India in the 1950s, so post-partition India, which was a very magical time, I feel. A Suitable Boy is a beautiful book because not only is it about Lata, the protagonist, finding herself a suitable boy, but it's also about India rediscovering itself and, turning a new leaf post like independence. So Bikram Seth's A Suitable Boy is a beautiful, beautiful book to read. The series, not so much. I personally didn't like them as much. When it comes to a movie, I think many of you must have watched it, but The Namesake had a very strong impact on me. And anything with Irfan Khan actually is a beautiful watch. So things like The Lunchbox or The Namesake. Namesake also makes for a great read. So I would highly recommend that you read it first and then watch the movie. When it comes to a brand campaign, I don't know about a human story. I'm going to talk about a very smart campaign, which probably cost the brand a lot of money, but it was a very, very smart campaign. If you think about Pan Bahar, which is, it's very funny that I'm mentioning this, but I thought it was brilliant. They actually their agency actually managed to get James Bond to do the ad,
Oh,
which
was it the
from
actor
an
in James Bond, like Daniel
the
Craig?
actor,
Oh,
yeah,
okay,
the original James Bond.
okay.
So he's the one who's doing an ad for Pan Bahar, believe it or not, which is like, honestly, it was, when you first watched it, you'd be like, what is this? And which is exactly what they were trying to achieve. From a marketing and a advertising perspective, it was the shock value of the ad which truly changed the whole thing, and it elevated the perception of the brand from like a pedestrian product. It turned into a very high class commodity,
Yeah.
because James Bond was advertising it. At the end of the day, you must watch the ad, it's hilarious. You've kind of put me on the spot for this one, but that's the first one that came to my mind, and it's one of my favorite ads simply because of the brilliant placement that they've done. People hated it, then there were people who loved it, but everybody was talking about it. And from a strategist perspective, I think it was a brilliant campaign. So yeah.
Wow, those are awesome. I'm gonna actually go look up this particular
Yeah, you
video right
should.
now. But Ari, thank you so much for being so honest, and thank you for all your work. And that's something um, that I think has given me a lot of comfort personally. But I know you do this for a lot more people in your little way, right? And I really hope you write more, because the world needs more of your writing and your stories, because I think it's so important um, and I think you're uniquely positioned with your background and experience to tell stories that are really important to say. And I think without your series, Pehchan, I don't think I would have talked about a part that's very important to me. So I hope you're able to give this platform to a lot more people, but not just with your work at a personal level, even professionally. There are so many wonderful projects you're working on. I'm actually curious about your thoughts on like other brand campaigns, and even as a film or a book reviewer, I think you do an amazing job. So there are so many things, so many different ways you add value to my life. And thank you again for your time, Aru. And we're going to come to the end of this episode of Learning Stories. Stay tuned for more such wonderful stories, and hopefully, we have another profile in a week or two. But I really, really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you did too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abhishek. Thank you for having me.
Yep.
Thank you.
Awesome.